Welcome to Small Arms Solutions. One of my more popular videos has been the one where I'm firing the British SA80 or L85. There were several questions regarding it, so we're going to talk a little bit about that gun. Fortunately, I do not have that weapon here. One of the first questions was where did I get it? That rifle was part of the Long Mountain Outfitters reference collection, which is one of the largest in the country. That rifle was a actual Enfield manufactured L85A1. We'll talk a little bit about what this gun is, the history. I'll give you some of my thoughts as well. But first we'll talk about where it came from. After World War II, the British, who were using the 303 British, were looking for their own semi-automatic rifle. So they went on to do some development in those intervening years, and in the 1950s they came out with what they called the 280 British. This was their version of an intermediate cartridge. And it was developed for the EM1, EM2 projects. Well, those projects actually were a bullpup design rifle, which was basically a longer barrel that has the magazine, the action behind the pistol grip. As this program went forward in the 1950s, also the NATO trials came through in the late 50s, which was to standardize cartridges for all NATO countries. The US submitted the 7.62 by 51 millimeter cartridge, and the British submitted these 280 British cartridge. The US has got quite a bit of influence, and what ended up happening was NATO adopted the 7.62 NATO. At that point, the British decided they didn't care. They were going to ramp up productions of the EM1 rifle and the 280 British cartridge until Sir Winston Churchill himself put a stop to that. So the entire project of the EM1, EM2, and the shorter 280 British was halted and put on the back burner, and the FNFAL was adopted. Now we go forward to the Vietnam War with the introduction of the 5.56 millimeter. The British at that point were working on their own small caliber after hearing of the success of the 5.56 millimeter cartridge in Vietnam. And what they had developed was the 4.85, which is shown here. They also brought back their design of the EM1 with the bullpup design, except they modernized it. They used stamp sheet metal, and they used synthetics instead of wood, and the gun was modernized. So the rifle was designed, and it was called the XL64E4 was the infantry rifle, and the E5 was the actual light support weapon with a much longer barrel. So quite a bit of testing went on with these until once again in the late 70s came another NATO trial. This time, due to the use of the 5.56, NATO was going to standardize on a new small caliber high velocity cartridge. So again, England submitted the 4.85, the US submitted the M193 ball, 5.56 millimeter, and there was other cartridges introduced by Belgium, France, to name a couple of them. Well, in the end, the 5.56 millimeter was adopted, but it wasn't the American M193. It was actually the Belgian SS109, which we know now is the 5.56 millimeter NATO. So the rifle that was originally used by England to fire the 485 was now converted into the SA80. So the SA80 program was a disaster from beginning to end. The rifle design actually was that of a Armalite AR-180. In fact, the bolts, if you were to look at them side by side, they are nearly identical. In fact, the UK ended up paying royalties to Sterling in England, who was manufacturing the AR-18s at that time. The first rifles that went into service were the L85, and once they were handed out to soldiers, there were a significant amount of problems. The gun had been reworked. They had multiple failures on several levels. The L8 E5A1 went into service right prior to Gulf War I. Operation Granby, as the British called it. And the rifle was found to be completely disastrous in the sand. In fact, it was so bad that the soldiers stopped using the L85A1s and picked up the FNFALs. After that, around 2000, the rifle still was in dismay. Heckler & Koch was actually owned by by a British-owned company, and they put them in charge of basically fixing the rifle. So they took their entire fleet and had sent them over to to Germany, and Germany had redesigned many of the components, and then they retrofitted them to what we know as the L85A2, which is the current issue rifle of the UK. The L85A2, some of the major improvements were, first was the magazine. They greatly enhanced the magazine for reliability. Many people know that as the HK High Reliability magazine. That was the actual magazine that was used to correct the feeding problems. In the intervening years, that contract was given to Magpul for the EMAG. So all the L85s now are using the Magpul EMAG. They had redone the bolt. They had done many of the welds. Part of the gas system was corrected. The parts were actually marked HK on them, so they knew which ones they were. HK-A2. To give you my impressions of the rifle, I didn't care for it at all. Don't let me say it's from a personal standpoint. It's not due to a mechanical issue. It's the fact that I don't like bullpups in general. I don't like 55,000 to 60,000 pounds of pressure per square inch underneath my cheek. I had also found with just the minimum shooting I did with it, the rifle heated up extremely quickly. In fact, in the one video that you saw me burning my hand on, touching the handguard. So I didn't particularly care for that aspect of it, the overheating as well. Recoil, there was no issues with it. The fact that I'm not accustomed to using bullpups also didn't help with it being comfortable. Also, I have longer arms, so the gun was not comfortable to me at all. The SUSAT scope that was on it, I didn't really care for either. It doesn't compare to any of the current Trijicons of that sort. The mechanics of it, I was using it in the desert. Again, I was shot in Las Vegas, Nevada. I had no mechanical problems. I fired a couple hundred rounds out of it. Not an extensive test by no means. When I did fire it, I had one issue with the rubber butt pad on it. It actually crumbled up and came off, like it had deteriorated at some point and came right apart. For someone who's trained on this rifle, I'm sure they didn't have a problem reloading quickly. Again, myself, as far as having to reload, I found it took significantly more time than the standard 5.56 M16 did, or M4 did, or many other NATO models. The bolt did lock open on the last shot, which was nice. One of the things a bullpup also suffers is the fact that the trigger sits so much further ahead of where the hammer is. So that generally can affect your trigger pull. The ammunition that I use was standard US MA55 ball. The British actually have their own production ammunition, which many experts claim is put together a little bit better than our M855 ball. It's a very interesting firearm. It probably has one of the worst histories and worst combat records since the show of World War I. The gun, in fact, was so bad that the British SAS won't use it. In fact, the SAS bought a rifle from Colt Canada. They couldn't use a Colt Defense rifle because at the time this was coming out, Colt Defense had been in bankruptcy, and the British government won't work with a company that's been in bankruptcy for for at least 10 years. Which worked out well because Colt Defense wouldn't have done the job that Colt Canada, or at that time Dimaco, did. They looked at the M4 carbine, they liked it, but it wasn't enough. The SAS decided they wanted to have a longer range, and they wanted the rifle to work better for extended fire. So Dimaco went to work and built down the rifle that they wanted. Instead of going with a 14.5-inch M4 barrel, they went with a 15.9-inch heavy barrel, which took care of the extended range that the SAS wanted, as well as for the actual fire itself, sustained fire, dissipated heat better. Another really interesting fact on that is the SAS actually spent more on the development of this SFW, which that was the model that the rifle was called. It was called the C8 SFW, or Special Forces weapon. They spent more money on the development of that than they actually did on the number of rifles that they bought. Now, the SAS had always used Dimaco rifles. Many times you would see them with the earlier C7 and C8 rifles. Actually, you did see that during Gulf War I. There's several pictures showing the original C7, which is the full-length rifle, and the C8, which is the carbine, being used by Brits in combat. Unfortunately, the regular Army was upset that the SAS got guns that worked and they didn't. So I hope you find this interesting. I know a lot of you found the actual video itself. If you like it, please click like and please subscribe. Thank you.